Hi there, hope everyone's doing well. I'm Dexter, a software developer for quite a while. I've always been drawn to the web, so I've got experience in quite a few frameworks, older and newer ones, but I've never really been satisfied until I encountered Svelte a few years back. I'm honored to be able to give a talk here about a new hobby I've acquired, creative coding, and I quote Wikipedia, a type of computer programming in which the goal is to create something expressive instead of something functional. I've always been fascinated about geometric patterns and visualizations. I'm inspired by the likes of Escher, Conway, Penrose, and Mandelbrot. And there's this software called Electric Sheep, which generates pretty visualizations based on a genetic algorithm. That's really interesting. So I've always been best at learning by playing with the things I'm interested in. And over the years I've implemented various Mandelbrot generators and similar things. A few months ago I've been starting to do creative experiments with Svelte, after I saw a visual on Facebook and thought, I can make that. Coding with Svelte is a blast, and it took less than half an hour to implement it, but that was just the beginning. Having coding it, I was able to play around with it, and twist and turn it into something else. Being able to play with the things I create is a blast. When coding creatively, the result isn't very important, but it's getting to explore the idea I had initially. Whether it's creating a spirographic pattern or trying to achieve an infinite zoom effect, it's often the mistakes that lead to the best results. For instance, in this visual I'm not exactly mimicking a spirograph, but it's much better in my opinion. I really love Svelte for its simplicity, and it brings me back to the plain old days of simple HTML or SVG. I get the full control of the DOM in an efficient manner, and trying to play with the coding structure is quite simply enjoyable. So today I have the idea to make a component which divides and nests itself recursively, something like a Mondrian picture. So let's start by diving into the code. So I'm starting off by importing this SVG component, which gives me a width and a height. It's a convenience file which makes sure the ratios are being kept and passed on, so it's always in view. It's quite handy. So here it has a size, SVG size basically, which determines the viewbox ratios depending on which is smaller and bigger, and it just passes everything to a slot. So for my ID, I just pass the width and the height to the components. So let's make this ID file. This ID file is inside of a Svelte namespace, SVG namespace. So I need to set the namespace in the Svelte options. So there we go. And as a test, I always like to draw a circle. Something's not. I have to reload. There we go. I see a circle. Let's give it a stroke and no fill. And a stroke. Oh, wait. There we go. But yeah, this is not my divvying up the space into separate chunks basically. So I have to set up a bunch of variables here. Let's start out with the width and the height we get passed. And let's define a division. No, wait, this needs to be. So this division will determine where the thing will divide, and we have to have a basic positional element. So let's call that x and y. So now let's draw a rect. This x and a y, and the width and the height. And let's pass with these properties. So now we have a rect being drawn here, but it's not completely in the right space, and that's due to not the right variables being passed. So let's pass them here. So that is x position minus the half, and y is minus the half the height. So there we go. There's a rect being drawn all around, and now we want to draw a rect, but then divide it by this division. And let's start out with divvying up the heights. So there we go. And then the first rect also can be divvied up. So now they both occupy the same space, but one needs to be upper and one needs to be lower. So let's add this y parameter. The division times the division, and this height needs to be not the division itself, but it needs to be the rest. So now when we animate this thing, we will see it move. But now, like, you see the divvy changing. So now is the point I want to introduce time, and I prepared this time file, which is, I really love the Svelte stores. It makes a store which sets the time in milliseconds. So I can just import this time, and it will just update every request animation frame. So I import the time here in my app from time, and I pass the time to this ID. I could also import the store directly into the ID file itself, but I would like to manipulate time maybe if I start to nest ideas. So let's pass this time variable, and now I can get the time, and this division, instead of being able to set it from the outside, let's just keep it inside. And let's say I take a sine from the time, and let's divide it, and sine goes from -1 to 1, and we want to keep the division between 1 and 0. So let's add 1 and divide by 2. And there we go. We have this space being divided up. Maybe give one a fill of HSL, like, I don't know. There we go. We've got movement. And now I'd like to start nesting. But before I want to start nesting, I actually want to fix the direction, because I want to be able to swap the direction. Now it's just a horizontal line. So let's get a direction, or let's call it horizontal. And whether it's true or false will determine which direction it will take. And instead of directly passing these options inside here, I will create a reaction which will be dependent on the horizontal value. So let's say rect A options is horizontal. If it's true, it will be this set of options, and otherwise it will be the other. And basically let's pass all these props. That's if it's horizontal, and otherwise we divvy up the width. For the rect B, it will be similar but slightly different, since we will have to do these calculations. No. Wait. Let's do them here, and this one. So here we add the width times the division, and here we change it this way. So now we have to pass the rect A options to this guy, and the rect B options to this guy. Nothing changes. So let's change the direction. There we go. That works. So now we're ready to nest this thing. So in order to nest it, I have to be able to stop it. So let's say we have a depth variable, and let's initialize that to 3. And I want to count this guy down until it's at 0, and then I want to stop the nesting. So my condition will be, if the depth is true, or it's bigger than 0, call or mount svelte.self, and pass it rect A options. Give it the time and give it the depth -1. And let's say horizontal is maybe not horizontal. So it will change every direction. There you go. Maybe having the circle there is nice. Maybe let's remove it. I don't know yet. And maybe pass B as well. It's getting there. So now we can start playing with maybe the division, which is now pretty boring, but if we maybe manipulate it based on depth itself, you create changes within the sine waves, and there'll be multiple sine waves. We could change the coloring. Where we could, let's see, we take this one and give it like a fill opacity of 0.2. And let's change the color of this one. And then based on the time divided by a somewhat bigger number and the depth, just playing around with the variables and seeing what happens. Given an opacity, should change things. This is nice, but it's not entirely what I'm looking for. I'm not sure what I'm looking for. Maybe disable stroke entirely. Oh, there, it already happened. We could also change the circle, or maybe have the circle. Yeah, let's have the circle be on top of everything. But change the stroke width to be maybe 1 over depth. And we could add a bit more layers, but you have to be careful with the layers because they will create a lot of objects. I will get a bit laggy, especially when I'm casting this stuff. Yeah, but I like this. I like where this is going. So we could also change the time itself because I made it a parameter. So maybe let's change the time for the rect A, like divided by 2. So now the nested things will move slower. And maybe make the time for the other one faster if it's nested. So multiply by 2. Ooh. And we can also start changing the horizontal based on time as well. So let's say I OR this with the time divided by 1,000, and then maybe floor it. Let's every second. Let's swap it. So I'm after floor the time if that's modulo 2 or modulo 3 if that's 0. Oh. I'm gonna remove a layer to ease the stress on my poor machine. Ah, there we go. So now it's changing. Maybe these colors are a bit too bright. I believe if I change the value, the saturation, and maybe as well the lightness. So yeah, I'm thinking like, what can I change? I'm not really sure now. Could be nice if you come up with something. Just play around with this code. I'll upload this to a repo and you can play around with it. But I implore you to just be more creative in your coding. You will find ways of doing things and be able to play and practice your skills with new software you didn't encounter. But it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to work. You're just learning new stuff and playing around with it, and you'll make some amazing code. Thanks, and enjoy the Svelte Society Day.